Welcome back to the Shakespeare Showdown show. This is episode number 6, in round 6 of the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. We are now past the halfway point, and we have 5 contestants remaining in this tournament. In previous episodes of this show, we talked a little about oxymorons. One of my favorite oxymorons is the title of an action movie from the 1990s, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, called True Lies. I've never actually watched the movie True Lies, and I don't plan on ever watching it, because I am positive it can never live up to such a good title. True Lies is a great oxymoron, because I think everyone has a good understanding of what it means. When you need to tell the truth, but you can't quite tell the whole truth, and you don't want to tell lies, so you compromise, and you tell something in the middle. Maybe on a first date, maybe in a job interview. It's nothing unethical. You're not telling untrue lies, you're telling true lies. Well, another time in life when people can tell true lies is when they give eyewitness testimony. In our episode today, we will be looking at the first scene of the third act. In this scene, Romeo's friend and the prince's quote-unquote near ally, in Romeo's words, Mercutio, is killed by Juliet's cousin and freshly Romeo's cousin, Tybalt. After which, Juliet's cousin and freshly Romeo's cousin, Tybalt, is killed by Juliet's husband, Romeo. After which Romeo flees as a fugitive. After all this happens, at the end of the scene, Romeo's cousin Benvolio is called upon by the prince to give his testimony about what happened. The prince calls Benvolio by name, saying, "Benvolio, who began this bloody fray?" And this is what Benvolio's response looks like. This speech will be the subject of our contest today. Notice the very last line by Benvolio here. He says, "This is the truth, or let Benvolio die," referring to himself, obviously, so the testimony that he gives, he's willing to stake his own life on. Coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, that line by Benvolio is Benvolio's last line in the entire play. After this speech, he goes away, and we never see or hear from him again. We are going to listen to the whole speech in an unabridged form from one of our remaining contestants, the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play. But before we do that, let's zoom out a little bit for some additional contextual framework. Before the prince commands Benvolio to give his testimony, we have Lady Capulet speaking, Juliet's mother and Tybalt's aunt, and she makes a command of her own to the prince, saying, "Prince, as thou art true," appealing to the integrity of the prince, or perhaps calling his integrity into question. Anyway, she says, "Prince, as thou art true, for blood of ours, shed blood of Montague." Remember that in the first scene of the first act, the prince pronounces the death penalty for anyone that disturbs the public peace in Verona. At this moment, the prince asks Benvolio for his testimony, and Benvolio gives his speech. After Benvolio's speech, Lady Capulet continues putting her pressure on the prince with the following 6 lines. "He is a kinsman to the Montague. Affection makes him false. He speaks not true. Some 20 of them fought in this black strife, and all those 20 could but kill one life." And then she brings down the thunder, with possibly her biggest lines in the play. "I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live." So, let's listen to this whole sequence, starting with Lady Capulet's first cri de coeur to the prince, with Tybalt lying dead on the stage, through Benvolio's speech, and then through Lady Capulet's final speech to the prince. This will be Miranda Foster as Lady Capulet, Andrew Vincent as the prince, and Jack Farthing as Benvolio, starting with the line, "O Prince, O Cousin Husband," from the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play. Let's listen.
Oh, Prince, oh, cousin husband! Oh, the blood is spilled of my dear kinsman! Prince, as thou art true, for blood of ours, shed blood of Montague! Oh, cousin!
Benvolio, who began this bloody fray?
Tybalt, here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay, Romeo that spoke him fair, bid him bethink how nice the quarrel was, and urged withal your high displeasure. All this uttered with gentle breath, calm look, knees humbly bowed, could not take truce with the unruly spleen of Tybalt, deaf to peace, but that he tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast, who, all as hot, turns deadly point to point, and with a martial scorn, with one hand beats cold death aside, and with the other sends it back to Tybalt, whose dexterity retorts it. Romeo, he cries aloud, "Hold, friends, friends part!" And swifter than his tongue, his agile arm beats down their fatal points, and twixt them rushes, underneath whose arm an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio, and then Tybalt fled. But by and by comes back to Romeo, who had but newly entertained revenge, and to it they go like lightning, for ere I could draw to part them, was stout Tybalt slain. And as he fell, did Romeo turn and fly. This is the truth, or let Benvolio die.
Ah! He is a kinsman to the Montague! Affection makes him false, he speaks not true. Some 20 of them fought in this black strife, and all those 20 could but kill one life. I beg for justice, which thou, Prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live.
And then after a few more lines, the prince will pronounce his verdict. What we saw is executed pretty much perfectly in our opinion. You can see the burden being put on the prince. You can hear the anxiety by Benvolio, and you can feel the hysteria from Lady Capulet. We are going to make an executive decision here. Because this performance is so good, and because this version of the play is our only contestant to give us a full unabridged version of Benvolio's speech, we will advance this contestant to the next round, and the remainder of this round will be a competition between the other 4 remaining contestants, who are now all elimination nominees. So now what are we going to do? We are going to watch all of the fights between all 4 Tybalts and all 4 Mercutios and all 4 Romeos, and we will see for ourselves whether or not and to what degree Benvolio is telling the truth. But before we get to the video clips, we need to do a very thorough analysis of Benvolio's speech to make sure we are all very familiar and comfortable with everything he says. After we've done that, then we can watch the fights. First, the speech. So, there are a number of ways we could do this. We could go through the speech line by line. We could go through the events chronologically. We could separate all of Benvolio's claims based on which individual they apply to, either Tybalt, Mercutio, or Romeo. We could separate every claim that Benvolio makes by whether it's a claim of opinion or a claim of fact. We could also compare Benvolio's speech to the events as they are described during the action by both textual dialogue and textual direction. We could also compare the speech in its unabridged version to the various shortened versions offered by each contestant. The way that we'll do this is we're going to attempt to do all of the above, plus some additional analysis of some marginal details as they come up. So, we're going to go through the speech line by line, studying each claim made by Benvolio. And we're going to separate what Benvolio says into 2 categories. The 2 categories will be claims of opinion and claims of fact. Claims of fact aren't actual facts, mind you, just what Benvolio claims are facts. So for example, when Benvolio says, quote-unquote, an envious thrust from Tybalt here, the adjective envious is a claim of opinion by Benvolio, and the verb thrust is a claim of fact. Although we should acknowledge that sometimes even verbs themselves can contain a small amount of opinionizing, like was it a thrust by Tybalt, or was it more of a lunge? So be advised, we are heading towards some very foggy territory, but we'll try to do the best that we can. We are going to also organize these claims according to if they pertain to Tybalt, to Mercutio, or to Romeo, the three participants involved in the afternoon strife. Benvolio himself is also involved, but only to a small degree. He's mostly a bystander. And after we do this, we will then make a timeline of important claims that are made by Benvolio, and this will give us a map to follow as we scrutinize the events as performed by each contestant. The timeline of important claims will be organized into 4 official parts, as follows. First of all, there is one part at the very beginning of the scene, which only includes Benvolio and Mercutio together. That's like part 0. There's no fighting in that part, and there won't be any claims made about that part, although we will look at it. After that, Tybalt arrives on the scene with his entourage. There's actually no fighting in this part either, and Benvolio makes no claims about this part either. But it is important, so we will look at it also. We'll call this part Mercutio and Tybalt's first interaction. After that part, Romeo arrives, fresh off his marriage to Juliet, and he and Tybalt have an interaction. We'll call this part Romeo and Tybalt's first interaction. After that part, we will have the second interaction between Mercutio and Tybalt, which is when they fight, and we'll call this part Fight, Mercutio versus Tybalt. After that, we will have the fourth part, which is when Romeo and Tybalt fight, and we'll call that Fight, Romeo versus Tybalt. So those are the 4 official parts, plus part 0, and we'll put Benvolio's important claims in the parts where they belong. So, let's go through this speech. And remember, when Benvolio is giving his testimony, Tybalt is already dead, usually lying on the stage, as we already saw, as Lady Capulet accuses Benvolio of lying on the stage verbally. Mercutio is also dead. Mercutio is supposed to die off stage, so he usually isn't on stage anymore, although he can be. Either way, Romeo is the only one of the 3 who's still alive, so the whole question here is what the prince's judgment of Romeo will be. The prince can't do anything about Tybalt or Mercutio because they're both dead. This may all sound very obvious, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, Benvolio's objective, besides to not dishonor himself by lying, is to persuade the prince to show mercy to Romeo. Benvolio is biased, naturally, because he's Romeo's close cousin, but the prince shows trust in Benvolio, and Benvolio did witness everything that happened, unlike Lady Capulet, who is outright speculating and falsely speculating when she says, for example, that 20 people were involved. So that's the situation. So, starting with the first line, Tybalt here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay. So when the prince asked the straightforward question, who began this bloody fray, Benvolio's immediate response is to say Tybalt, clearly implicating Tybalt as the responsible party. Now, is this a claim of opinion or a claim of fact? Well, it's tricky, as we will see later, and as we can plainly read in the text, Tybalt does come looking to fight Romeo. So in that sense, yes, he does instigate a fight. Although, as we will also see later, and as we can plainly read in the text, Romeo refuses to engage Tybalt in that fight. So if the fight Tybalt wanted wasn't the one he got, at least not initially, is he still responsible? That is the question. It could be argued that Tybalt was honor-bound to challenge Romeo, and if you're honor-bound, well then, you're honor-bound. What can you do? If Romeo's quote-unquote intrusion on the Capulet quote-unquote solemnity demands an accounting for, then maybe the fault falls on Romeo. For now, let's put Tybalt beginning the fray as both opinion and fact. And as you can see, this is getting really foggy really fast. Remember, Tybalt can't be punished by the prince, but Tybalt instigating the fight is favorable to Romeo. Benvolio in this line also adds the testimony that Tybalt was killed by Romeo. So, honestly, Benvolio doesn't try to cover up or deny the fact that Romeo killed Tybalt. He acknowledges it openly, although he then immediately continues his favorable treatment of Romeo. In the next 2.5 lines, he makes 3 claims about Romeo. First, that Romeo spoke Tybalt fair, which could either mean he spoke fair to him or he spoke fair about him, or both. Second, that Romeo warned against quarreling, how nice the quarrel was, meaning how not nice it was. And third, that Romeo specifically invoked the prince's warning against fighting. The prince's warning we heard for ourselves in scene 1.1. These are the claims of fact made about Romeo. And actually, according to Romeo's dialogue as written, all 3 of them should be true. Romeo, in fact, tells Tybalt that he loves him and that he tenders Tybalt's name as dearly as his own. That's speaking him pretty fair, both to him and about him, we would say. Also, when Tybalt and Mercutio begin to fight, Romeo urges against it, saying, "Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage," and also, "The prince expressly hath forbidden bandying in Verona streets." So if Romeo says what he's supposed to say, as written by William Shakespeare, then Benvolio is telling the truth here. And then, after those 3 claims, Benvolio makes 3 descriptions about Romeo's behavior, saying that Romeo spoke with gentle breath, calm look, and knees humbly bowed. Gentle breath and calm look, we would say, are both claims of opinion. Knees humbly bowed, we would say, is yet another statement of fact. Humbly, as an adverb, is very favorable to Romeo. But humbly is the only way a person can bow their knees. Bowing knees is inherently humble. So we will say it's a claim of fact by Benvolio that Romeo humbly bowed his knees. In the next 3 lines, we get, "Could not take truce with the unruly spleen of Tybalt." Unruly is an opinion, we think. Continuing, "deaf to peace," also an opinion probably, although Benvolio is walking a fine line here. In any case, that description wraps up Romeo and Tybalt's first interaction, which brings us to the next interaction, which is the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt. According to Benvolio, Tybalt tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast. Tilts is a claim of fact about Tybalt, and Benvolio here, seemingly, is claiming that Tybalt tilted toward Mercutio first, thus being guilty of making the first aggressive action. We think that's the implication Benvolio is making. Maybe not, but it sounds like that's the implication. This is important because, even in modern times, the person who bears the greatest responsibility, usually, is the person who makes first physical contact, or the first attempt at physical contact. In Romeo and Juliet, this is something that depends entirely on how the scene is performed, as directed by the director and as played by the players. The text doesn't say who strikes first. The text does say, however, who draws first. The direction that we get in the text is that Mercutio draws before he says the line, "Tybalt, you rat-catcher, will you walk?" After which Tybalt asks, "What wouldst thou have with me?" And Mercutio says, "Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives," etc. Then Tybalt says, "I am for you," with the direction drawing. So, Mercutio clearly should draw first, even though he's not the one on trial here, because he's dead. And actually, we not only have these textual directions that incriminate Mercutio in drawing first, but Mercutio also has a line earlier in the scene, before Romeo arrives, during Mercutio and Tybalt's first interaction, where Mercutio tells Tybalt, "Here's my fiddlestick, here's that shall make you dance," referencing his sword, usually flouting or brandishing his sword as he says this. So Benvolio, who is trying to paint Romeo in the best light possible by painting Tybalt in the worst light possible, might not be giving a full account of Mercutio's involvement in this skirmish. He may be conveniently omitting details. Benvolio also calls Mercutio bold, but that could either mean he was acting boldly in the moment or that he has a bold personality in general, which we know to be true. We think it probably means the latter. In the next 4 lines or so, we get a description of Tybalt and Mercutio's fighting. Both participants are called hot, and adding that Mercutio demonstrated martial scorn. Basically, the description is that the fighting goes back and forth. We think martial scorn is yet another one that could go either way in terms of opinion or fact, because sword fighting is inherently martial. Is it necessarily scornful? Maybe, maybe not. Benvolio does give Tybalt one compliment, which is that he had dexterity, which is nice of Benvolio. Then we get 3 more claims about Romeo, the first being significant because unlike the previous claims about Romeo, this one is a direct quotation. Benvolio says that Romeo cried aloud, quote, "Hold friends, friends part," end quote. That's a strong assertion being made by Benvolio of something very specific being yelled by Romeo. And interestingly, unlike the other claims that Benvolio has made that were supported by Romeo's written dialogue, this claim, as a direct quote at least, isn't supported. As the play is written, Romeo never says, "Hold friends, friends part." At best, this is Benvolio paraphrasing what Romeo said. Romeo does say, for example, "Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage." So it's not inaccurate as far as loose paraphrasing goes, but as a direct quote, it's not accurate. Something to be aware of. Continuing, we get, "Swifter than his tongue," speaking about Romeo still, "his agile arm beats down their fatal points, and twixt them rushes." So Romeo apparently physically intervenes in Tybalt and Mercutio's fight, blocking the thrusts of their swords, certainly stepping between them. The stepping between them part isn't supported as a stage direction, but we know it happens because Mercutio, as part of his dying speech, says to Romeo, "Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm." To which Romeo, quite tragically, responds, "I thought all for the best." Maybe the most tragic line in the play. That interaction between Mercutio and Romeo is as good as any stage direction, and it's usually followed. Benvolio continues, actually describing this exact thing, under whose arm an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio. Again, envious is probably an unnecessary opinion, and stout as well, although that could be opinion about Mercutio's personality in general. And then the phrase, and then Tybalt fled. And then we get, but by and by comes back to Romeo, who had but newly entertained revenge. Both interesting claims. Tybalt coming back to the scene isn't favorable to Tybalt, but it's a claim that's supported by both a direction and a line of dialogue. When it happens, Benvolio says, "Here comes the furious Tybalt back again," with a direction that says, "Re-enter Tybalt." As for the phrase, "newly entertained revenge," that can also be in a foggy area between opinion and fact. We're going to put it as a fact because we think that's a pretty straightforward thing to claim about Romeo. So the claim being made by Benvolio to the prince is that Romeo killed Tybalt as revenge for killing Mercutio, who we know is the prince's quote-unquote near ally. But beyond being favorable to Romeo in that regard, it's furthermore favorable to Romeo because, to put it in modern terms, it makes Romeo's crime a crime of passion, as opposed to a premeditated killing. And then we get, "And to it they go like lightning, for ere I could draw to part them, was stout Tybalt slain." So Benvolio calls Tybalt stout as well, same as he did Mercutio, which is nice of him. And then, "And as he fell, did Romeo turn and fly. This is the truth, or let Benvolio die." His final words in the play, curiously. So, what do we have here? Let's set aside the opinions of Benvolio for just a second, although we'll keep them in the back of our minds. For now, let's just inventory what cold hard claims are being made. The fact that Tybalt killed Mercutio, as well as the fact that Romeo killed Tybalt, these claims are cold and hard, but they aren't all that important, because they aren't what's controversial. There was a crowd of Verona citizens that witnessed everything, so there's no denying or escaping who killed who. The controversy is the surrounding details about who did what exactly to initiate and to escalate. That's what the prince wants to know, and that's what Romeo's fate depends on. So let's do this one person at a time, starting with Tybalt. Benvolio claims that Tybalt is responsible for beginning the fray, that he attacked Mercutio, possibly implying he attacked first, and that he fled, and more importantly, after fleeing, returned to Romeo and fought Romeo. We'll say he returned to Romeo and fought Romeo, instead of he returned to fight Romeo, to be as fair as we can. He returned to Romeo and he fought Romeo. As for Mercutio, we don't get any major indictments other than he hotly / scornfully engaged Tybalt in mutual mortal combat. The prince may be left with unanswered questions about whether Mercutio's participation was mostly offensive or defensive. All Benvolio claims, really, is that Mercutio fought Tybalt. Once again, Benvolio might not be giving a full and accurate representation of Mercutio's involvement, which benefits Romeo. As for Romeo, Benvolio claims that Romeo urged against Tybalt and Mercutio fighting, which is totally supported by Romeo's textual dialogue, which should be spoken on stage. He claims that Romeo bowed his knees in submission, something that depends entirely on how it's performed, but so far this is all very favorable to Romeo. He claims that Romeo cried, "Hold friends, friends part," which is not supported by the text, except if you consider it paraphrasing. He claims that Romeo physically intervened between Tybalt and Mercutio. That is supported by the text, and it's also favorable to Romeo, and Benvolio adds that Romeo fought and killed Tybalt, but he did so as a matter of revenge for killing Mercutio. Now, let's make our timeline of major claims that will be a map as we investigate our 4 contestants. These will be the things that we look closely for, or look closely at, in our study of the video clips, and we'll put these in chronological order. As for Mercutio and Tybalt's first interaction, Benvolio makes no claims, but the interaction is important and Benvolio was there to witness it. It would be convenient for Benvolio to leave out some of this information. We will examine how convenient it is exactly. As for the first interaction between Romeo and Tybalt, we know that Romeo speaks Tybalt fair. That should happen, but we will see if Benvolio's further descriptions of Romeo are true. First, that Romeo spoke with quote-unquote gentle breath and quote-unquote calm look, and second, that Romeo at some point bowed his knees. Those will be major claims number 1 and number 2, and they're things that we can easily check. We will also see if Tybalt's treatment of Romeo is quote-unquote unruly or quote-unquote deaf to peace, as Benvolio claims. That will be major claim number 3. As for the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt, we will look for who draws their sword first, which Benvolio conveniently doesn't mention. So we will be looking at how convenient that is exactly. Remember, Mercutio should draw first. That will be number 4. We'll also be on the lookout for who strikes first, or tilts first. Benvolio says that Tybalt tilted with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast, which, again, may or may not be an implication that Tybalt made the first move. We won't make an official point of this. We'll just watch for who strikes first, just to see who's guilty of striking first. Just something to pay attention to. More importantly, during Mercutio and Tybalt's fight, we will be looking at what Romeo does, if and how he urges against the quarreling. One thing that we can look for and check specifically is if Romeo invokes the prince's high displeasure, which Benvolio claims he does. This will be number 5. As for the fight between Romeo and Tybalt, we will be looking for one major thing, and that is if Tybalt does in fact return to the scene. That will be number 6. And these 6 things will be the 6 things that we will closely look for. We have 4 cases to consider. We will do this one contestant at a time, going all the way through the scene to see how the events hold up against Benvolio's testimony. Each contestant will have their own unique version of Benvolio's testimony, so what we'll do is this. We'll watch the action, comparing the action to Benvolio's speech as we've studied it in its full form, and then we'll assess whether each of these claims is true or false, or in the case of who draws first, with the understanding that it's favorable to Romeo for Benvolio to conceal that Mercutio draws first, which he's supposed to do. And then, at the conclusion of the action, we'll listen to that contestant's Benvolio speech, and we'll see how that version's action holds up against its own version of the speech. Also, when we say that we're going to look at how the events hold up against the speech, we don't mean that this is going to be a contest of which Benvolio is the most honest, because it's a lot more interesting when he isn't 100% honest, because true lies are more interesting than true truths, and besides, we already know he's not 100% honest. We're just saying we're going to look at how the events hold up against the speech. That's all we're saying. So, we're going to go in order, starting with the 1936 movie. With this version, we'll actually start at the very beginning of the scene. Benvolio has the first line, which is, "I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire." This will be Reginald Denny as Benvolio, with John Barrymore, Drew Barrymore's grandfather, as Mercutio. Let's listen to this.
I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire. The day is hot, the Capulets abroad, and if we meet, we shall not escape a brawl.
So Benvolio never mentioned it to the prince, but let it be known that Benvolio also urged against quarreling with the Capulets, which is honorable of him. After this part, we get Mercutio and Tybalt's first interaction, when Mercutio calls his sword a fiddlestick. This will be Tybalt here in the black, played by Basil Rathbone. And this is how it sounds.
Follow me close, for I will speak with them. Gentlemen, goddamn, a word with one of you.
And but one word with one of us? Couple it with something. Make it a word and a blow.
You shall find me apt enough to that, sir, and you will give me occasion.
Could you not take some occasion without giving?
Mercutio, thou consortst with Romeo.
Consort? What if thou make us minstrels? I'ma make minstrels of us. Look to hear nothing but discords. Here's my fiddlestick. Here's that'll make you dance. Zounds, consort.
Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
Clearly, Mercutio isn't trying his hardest to escape a brawl. When Tybalt says, "Here comes my man," that's when Romeo enters the scene. So now we begin Romeo and Tybalt's first interaction, and this will be Leslie Howard as Romeo. We're looking for Romeo's gentle breath, Romeo's bended knee, and if Tybalt is deaf to peace. Let's watch.
Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better turn than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none, therefore farewell, I see thou knowst me not.
Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries thou hast done me.
So Romeo speaking with a calm and gentle tone is true. We're not done studying this part quite yet, but at no point in this scene will Romeo bend his knee, so that is a false claim by Benvolio. And there's something to keep in mind about Tybalt's reaction. Romeo gives Tybalt two different outs. That is to say, Romeo gives him two different opportunities to withdraw his challenge. The first is when he says, "Therefore farewell, I see thou knowest me not," which we just heard, and he begins to walk away. That's the first opportunity. And at this point, Tybalt continues to provoke Romeo. The second out Romeo gives him is when he says, "Be satisfied," and Romeo attempts a second time to walk away. Let's watch that.
Therefore turn and draw.
I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
I think the test of whether or not Tybalt is truly unruly and deaf to peace is his reaction when Romeo gives him the second out. He clearly is deaf to peace the first time, but he can't be accused of being totally deaf to peace if he takes the second out and ultimately walks away. In this performance, Tybalt looks pretty satisfied by Romeo's capitulation, and he begins to leave. Therefore, we think it counts as a falsity by Benvolio to claim that Tybalt was deaf to peace, making this the second falsity. Now, something important between the first out that Romeo gives him and the second one, Tybalt makes the demand turn and draw. The textual directions don't have Tybalt drawing his sword at this point, however, so his sword isn't supposed to be drawn yet, which would make him more deaf to peace, as Benvolio claims. One version that does have Tybalt drawing here is the 1978 BBC TV movie, which we eliminated in the last episode, but that we teased we would still show because it has Alan Rickman as Tybalt. So, this is what it looks like when Tybalt draws his sword during this interaction, instead of at Mercutio later, which is when and at who he's supposed to draw it. This is Patrick Reichart as Romeo, with Alan Rickman, Professor Snape himself, as Tybalt.
Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore farewell, I see thou knowest me not.
Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me, therefore turn and draw.
I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
So, there you have it. I think it can be interesting to have Tybalt draw his sword at this point, because if Tybalt has his sword drawn and Romeo doesn't, it makes it very one-sided. It makes Tybalt look even more belligerent and Romeo even more meek, especially with the point of the sword right next to his throat. Romeo is a little less gentle in his tone in this version, a little more sassy, but it's hard for him to not look meek, what with the point of Tybalt's sword right on his throat. Anyway, let's go back to the 1936 and see what happens next. Next is the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt, when Tybalt is traditionally supposed to draw his sword. Let's see how that looks.
Oh, calm, dishonorable, vile submission. Alice, no cart that carries it away. Down! You rat catcher, will you walk?
What wouldst thou have with me?
Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives.
I am for you.
Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up.
So in this version, even though Tybalt is momentarily pacified by Romeo, he is nonetheless very quick to accept Mercutio's challenge. The draw is simultaneous, so we'll call it a draw. And we'll mark it as an X, which is still inaccurate according to the text, but the simultaneous draw does look and sound really cool. Let's enjoy that one more time.
One of your 9 lives.
I am for you.
Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up.
So let's see how Tybalt and Mercutio's fight goes. Romeo will be urging them to stop, remember, and we need to pay attention to what exactly Romeo says or doesn't say.
Draw, Benvolio, beat down their weapon. Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage.
So Romeo urges Benvolio to intervene to beat down their weapons. When Benvolio doesn't, Romeo uses his sword to block a movement by Mercutio, directly exposing Mercutio to the thrust by Tybalt, resulting in the death blow. But at no point does Romeo invoke the prince by name, making such claim false. Let's skip ahead to the fight between Romeo and Tybalt. All we're looking for here is if Tybalt returns to Romeo. This is what it looks like.
Tybalt! Now, Tybalt, take the villain back again that late thou gavest me. For Mercutio's soul is but a little way above our heads, waiting for thine to keep him company. Either thou or I or both must go with him.
This shall determine that.
Clearly, Tybalt does not return to Romeo. Romeo goes searching for Tybalt, and he finds him on a rather lovely patio of sorts, quite leisurely enjoying a drink. This would be the fourth of Benvolio's lies. And let's go ahead and finish this fight. It's pretty short. This is what it looks like when Romeo stabs Tybalt. So that's a pretty classic fight between Romeo and Tybalt, with a nice maneuver with the cape by Romeo at the end. Let's fast forward to the arrival of the prince and listen to Benvolio's speech. Benvolio's speech in this version will actually look like this. Let's listen to it.
Benvolio! Who began this bloody fray?
O noble prince, an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio. Then Tybalt fled, but by and by comes Romeo. And to it they go like lightning. Ere I could draw to part them was stout Tybalt slain. And as he fell, did Romeo turn and fly.
So Benvolio doesn't make any controversial claims about what happened, which is interesting and disappointing. He just says that Tybalt killed Mercutio, which is true, that Tybalt fled, which is true, and that Romeo and Tybalt fought each other, and that Tybalt died and that Romeo fled. All true. And actually, this speech alters the line that's supposed to be by and by comes back to Romeo. It alters it to just say by and by comes Romeo, which makes Romeo's attack on Tybalt at the patio now also true. The speech was edited to make one of Benvolio's lies now true. So our verdict on the 1936 movie is that, according to the full form of Benvolio's speech, as it's written, Benvolio should be guilty of numerous lies. But according to the version of Benvolio's speech that they implemented, he isn't guilty of any. Next, we have the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie. Let's see what this version has in store. Let's start the action with Tybalt, Mercutio, and Benvolio at the water fountain. This will be Michael York as Tybalt, John McInerney as Mercutio, and Bruce Robinson as Benvolio.
Gentlemen, good day.
Good day.
A word with one of you.
And but one word with one of us. Couple it with something, make it a word and a blow.
You shall find me apt enough for that, sir, and you will give me occasion.
Oh, can you not take some occasion without the giving?
Mercutio, thou consorts with Romeo.
Consort? What dost thou make us, minstrels? You make minstrels of us, you look to hear nothing but discords. Here's my fiddlestick. Here's that shall make you dance. Zoons, consort!
We talk here in the public haunt of men. Either withdraw unto some private place, or reason coldly of your grievances, or else depart. Here all eyes gaze on us.
Men's eyes were made to look, and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure, I.
So in this version, he has his sword totally unsheathed and pointed at Tybalt very provocatively, albeit from an unthreatening position in the water fountain. We also get one extra attempt at peacekeeping by Benvolio, which the MGM didn't include. This brings us to the arrival of Romeo. Let's watch how this looks.
Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
Mercutio!
Tybalt?
Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain, am I none? Therefore farewell. I see thou knowest not me.
Boy! This shall not excuse the injuries thou hast done me. Therefore turn and draw!
I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
So Tybalt is mostly bewildered, which is a fascinating way to do it. Romeo speaks fair, with gentle breath, we would say. No knees bowed, same as before, which would be a lie, the same as before. Let's watch Tybalt's reaction here and see if he is deaf to peace. So Tybalt, bewildered at first, ultimately does look pretty satisfied with Romeo's submission. But he takes the opportunity to gloat and to get one more splash in against Mercutio. So Tybalt is a sore winner here, but he is leaving. So we think it's fair to say it is a false claim that he is deaf to peace. Even as a sore winner and getting a gratuitous splash in, we think he's open to peace. So we'll mark that as false. Let's move on to Mercutio challenging Tybalt.
Oh, come, dishonorable, vile submission!
No, Mercutio, no!
Leave me! Tybalt! You rat-catcher!
What wouldst thou have with me?
Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives that I mean to make bold withal. And as you shall use me hereafter, dry beat the rest of the 8.
Please, good Mercutio.
Mercutio seemingly draws his sword a second time, which may be a continuity error, but he for sure does it at least once, and as much as twice before Tybalt ever does it. So we'll mark this with an M for Mercutio, which is consistent with the text, and a convenient detail for Benvolio to leave out. Let's continue.
Will you pluck your sword out of his pilcher by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears and it be out!
I'm for you, sir.
Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up.
Come on. Come.
So they begin to fight, and this fight goes on for a few minutes. Let's keep watching this.
Benvolio, bring down their weapons. Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. The prince expressly has forbid this banding in Verona streets. Tybalt!
Romeo says the line that he's supposed to, invoking the prince's displeasure, which would make for a true claim by Benvolio. And this is what it looks like when Tybalt stabs Mercutio in this version.
Tybalt, no! Gentlemen, for shame! Mercutio, come!
No, but
Fly, Tybalt, fly away! Go away from here!
So, in this version of the fight, when Tybalt actually stabs Mercutio, he seems shocked by it, bewildered once again, and he escapes in horror. Anyway, after all this happens, we have Romeo's pursuit of Tybalt in the streets of Verona. So once again, this is definitely not Tybalt returning to Romeo. Romeo chases Tybalt down very clearly, so we'll mark this as a falsehood. And this is what it looks like when Romeo finally stabs Tybalt in this version.
Romeo, away! Begone!
So, according to the full version of Benvolio's speech, as it is written, Benvolio would have a pretty good mix of truth and lies here. Let's fast forward and see what Benvolio actually says in this version. This is Benvolio's speech to the prince. Once again, this will be Bruce Robinson as Benvolio, and we'll also hear Natasha Perry as Lady Capulet.
Prince, as thou art true, for blood of ours, shed blood of Montague!
Benvolio, who began this bloody fray?
Tybalt, here slain!
No!
Romeo, did speak him fair. Bid him bethink how nice the quarrel was, and urged with all your high displeasure.
It's true, Prince!
Affection makes him false. He speaks untrue!
So once again, we have a very heavily abridged speech. We do get one small series of claims by Benvolio, which is that Romeo spoke Tybalt fair, bid him bethink how nice the quarrel was, and urged the prince's displeasure, which are all corroborated by the video. So, similar to the 1936 MGM movie, the Benvolio in the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie doesn't tell any lies, but only because his dishonest lines of dialogue are missing. If either one of these Benvolios so far spoke the whole speech, they would be liars. But as it stands, according to the speeches that are included, neither one of them are liars. Next up is the 1992 Stratford stage play. Let's see how this looks. We will start at the same spot as last time with Tybalt, Mercutio, and Benvolio. This will be Lorne Kennedy as Tybalt, Calm Fior as Mercutio, and Paul Miller as Benvolio. Let's watch.
Gentlemen, good evening. A word with one of you.
And but one word with one of us? Couple it with something. Make it a word and a blow.
You shall find me apt enough to that, sir. And you shall give me occasion.
Could you not take some occasion without giving?
Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo.
Consort? Dost thou make us minstrels? And thou make minstrels of us, look to hear nothing but discord. Here's me fiddlestick, here's that shall make you dance. Zoons. Consort?
We talk here in the public haunt of men. Either withdraw to some private place, or reason coldly of your grievances, or else depart.
So Mercutio obviously has his sword drawn too early here. This is when Romeo enters.
Here all eyes gaze on us.
Men's eyes were made to look, and let them gaze. I will not budge for no man's pleasure, I.
Well, peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
And I'll be hanged, sir, if he wear your livery. Marry, go before the field, he'll be your follower. Your worship may in that sense call him man.
Romeo! The love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain!
So, with respect to Romeo and Tybalt, even though neither one of them have their weapons drawn, Tybalt does strike Romeo first, even if the slap is only a formality. He does make physical contact first. Continuing.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore farewell. I see thou know'st me not.
Boy! This shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me. Therefore turn and fight!
I do protest I never injured thee.
So this is a very interesting maneuver by Tybalt. Romeo comes unarmed, but Tybalt does this trick where he tosses him a sword as he's turning around, making him to instinctively catch it. Continuing.
But love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
So Romeo isn't being the most gentle here, but what he says is gentle and calm. His tone is a little bit sassy. Leonard Whiting, in the last version, the 68, had a much more gentle breath, we would say, but we'll still mark it as true, even though it's a little sassy. Romeo never bows during this interaction, so that would be yet another falsehood claimed by Benvolio. Continuing.
Calm, dishonorable, vile submission! Aristocata carries it away! Tybalt, you rat catcher! Will you walk?
What wouldst thou have with me?
Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives. That I mean to make bold withal, and as you shall use me hereafter, dry beat the rest of the 8. Will you pluck your sword out of his pilcher by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears ere it be out.
I am for you!
But you shall put thy weapon up!
After this interaction, can we say that Tybalt is satisfied and ready to leave in peace before Mercutio intervenes? It's tough to say. we think this is similar to the Basil Rathbone version in that Tybalt does look like he's aching for a fight, and he's very quick to accept Mercutio's challenge, but he does appear to be content with leaving Romeo alone. So we'll mark this as a falsehood yet again. Mercutio is also guilty of making the first thrust, but it happens very quickly. It's basically a draw, but Mercutio definitely draws first, and he probably thrusts first. This is what that looks like.
Come, sir. You're passado.
Drop Benvolio! Bring down their weapons! Gentlemen, for shame! Forbear this outrage! Tybalt! Mercutio! The prince expressly has forbid this banding in the streets!
So during the fight, we hear that Romeo does mention the prince's displeasure, so we'll mark that as true. And this is what it looks like when Tybalt stabs Mercutio.
Away, Tybalt! Away! Away!
I'm hurt.
So that's a very comedic delivery of that line, which is one way to do it. It's very brief. After this happens, the scene goes back to being deadly serious. We're not totally sure how we feel about that. Mercutio does have a pun as part of his dying speech when he says, "You shall find me a grave man." That line, even though Mercutio was making a joke, is almost always given to purely serious effect. Here we have an example of a line given to comedic effect that normally isn't for comedic effect. It's not bad, if only for the sake of mixing things up. It's not bad. At worst, we're ambivalent about it. Mercutio isn't the one who's on trial here. Let's skip forward to when Tybalt returns to the stage. This is what that looks like.
This but begins the woe. Others must end. Here comes the furious Tybalt back again. Alive, in triumph, and Mercutio slain. Away to heaven, respective lenity. And fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt, take the villain back again that late thou gavest me. For Mercutio's soul is but a little way above our heads, staying for thine to keep him company. Either thou, or I, or both must go with him.
Thou wretched boy that did consort him here, shalt with him hence.
This shall determine that!
So obviously Tybalt returning is now a true statement. At this point we have the Romeo versus Tybalt fight, and this is what that looks like. And this is what it looks like when Romeo stabs Tybalt in this version.
Romeo!
So now, let's fast forward and listen to the speech by Benvolio, starting with the prompt by the prince. This is what Benvolio's testimony will look like, and this is what it will sound like.
Oh, cousin. Cousin.
Benvolio! Who began this bloody fray? Tybalt, here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay. An envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio, and then Tybalt fled. But by and by comes back to Romeo, and to it they go like lightning. For ere I could draw to part them, was stout Tybalt slain. And as he fell, did Romeo turn and fly. This is the truth. Or let Benvolio die.
He's a kinsman to the Montague.
So as for this version of Benvolio's testimony, a lot of the controversial claims are missing, yet again, which is frustrating. Benvolio does mention that Tybalt came back, which is true, he did, which is sort of the only way you can do it on a stage, because there aren't really any Verona alleys and things like that. So once again, for the third time in a row, what should be an interesting mix of truth and lies by Benvolio is reduced to some brief, convenient, and uncontroversial truths only. Let's watch a couple more clips from this contestant, just because they're interesting. First, in this version, we can hear an alternative way for Lady Capulet to give her line, "Romeo must not live." Let's listen to this, with Kate Trotter as Lady Capulet.
Affection makes him false, he speaks not true. I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live!
So, instead of using this line to beg the prince, she uses it more as a way of rallying the mob, which is a smart move because that's probably a lot more persuasive to the prince, and you can see the fear of the mob in the prince's face. Also, let's get Romeo's father in here for a little bit. This is what Lord Montague has to say in defense of his son. This is Ian White as the Lord Montague.
Romeo slew him. He slew Mercutio. Who now the price of his dear blood doth owe?
Not Romeo's, prince. He was Mercutio's friend. His fault concludes, but what the law should end. The life of Tybalt.
And this is the point where the prince gives his verdict, but we'll save that for later. Moving on to our final subject of analysis today, the 1996 Baz Luhrmann movie. We're just going to take this one step at a time. We'll start from the very beginning of the scene once again, when Benvolio and Mercutio are together. Mercutio is the one shooting the gun in the water. Benvolio is the one up on the tower. In this scene, we are going to have Dash Myhawk as Benvolio, Harold Perrineau as Mercutio, John Leguizamo as Tybalt, and Leonardo DiCaprio as Romeo. This is what the first part looks like.
I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire. The day is hot, the capitals are abroad.
And if we meet, we shall not escape a brawl. For now these hot days is the mad blood stirring.
And then we have the arrival of Tybalt with the Capulet entourage.
Follow me close. Gentlemen, good day. A word with one of you?
Oh! And but one word with one of us. Couple it with something.
Make it a word and a blow. You shall find me apt enough to that, sir. And you will give me occasion.
Let's skip ahead in the action to the arrival of Romeo. This is what that looks like.
Peace be with you, sir. Here comes my man.
Mercutio!
Romeo! The love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
one brief interjection here on something that we haven't mentioned yet. Sometimes instead of saying, "the love I bear thee," Tybalt says, "the hate I bear thee," because that's what's printed in the 1597 Q1 text, which is how the 2009 does it. In fact, let's go back to the 2009 and listen to that. This is Tybalt saying, "the hate I bear thee," instead of "the love I bear thee" to Romeo.
The hate I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting.
Most people agree that the word love is better, which is a little counterintuitive at first because Tybalt hates Romeo, but love does make more sense because Tybalt is saying he loves him so little that he can't afford a better term. Having a little amount of love makes more sense for Tybalt than having a little amount of hate. In the opinion of the Shakespeare Showdown show, once again, we don't think it matters that much, even if the two words are literally exact opposites of each other. Tybalt's verbal attack is still a verbal attack, but we lean in favor of love. So, going back to the 1996, this is Romeo's response to Tybalt.
Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore farewell. I see thou knowest me not.
So that's Tybalt's first opportunity for peace. We have Romeo speaking fair once again, clearly. Let's continue.
Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me! Turn and draw! Turn and draw! Turn and draw! Turn and draw!
I protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, whose name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied.
So, we now finally have a Romeo on his knees. This is the first time that has been a true statement. And once again, we have a confused reaction by Tybalt. He can't even process what he's seeing in front of him. The confusion is great. It makes it more intense, more volatile, but that could just be the dramatic music. I'm not sure. Anyway, let's see if Tybalt, having been given his second opportunity for peace, accepts it, which is what we saw the previous three Tybalts do. This is Tybalt's reaction with John Leguizamo.
Be satisfied.
Calm, dishonorable, vile submission.
So in this version, finally, once again, we see a Tybalt that rejects Romeo's submission and continues to assault him, turning this now into a situation that's not only more intense, but also very awkward, because now one side is insisting on fighting while the other one is refusing. Skipping ahead again, this version is going to need to be different because the weapons here are guns instead of swords. The way they handle it is like this. There's no guns used in the scene, at least not in this part. What we have is Tybalt punching and kicking Romeo, and then Mercutio does decide to intervene, but not before abandoning his own gun. And this is what that looks like.
You rat catcher! Will you walk? What would thou have with me? Good king of cats, nothing but one for 9 lives. Flying for you!
So in this version, who are we going to say draws first? Mercutio implements a wooden implement against Tybalt and takes the first swing, but it's to intervene on behalf of a totally submissive and vulnerable Romeo who isn't defending himself. We're going to say that Mercutio draws first, but we'll put an asterisk here saying that we acknowledge the nuance that Mercutio is acting nobly. Tybalt doesn't thrust at Mercutio first. Mercutio is the one who swings at Tybalt first, but again, it's on behalf of a defenseless Romeo. Continuing a little further, this is Mercutio fighting Tybalt with Romeo playing peacemaker.
Outrage, Mercutio!
So Romeo once again never mentions the prince, specifically. Although he does say the line, "Spare this outrage, good Mercutio," and he does position himself in front of Mercutio as he's supposed to. And this is what it looks like when Tybalt kills Mercutio. And then Mercutio gives his famous dying speech. Now, in this movie, they do some cutting and pasting here. Between Tybalt and Mercutio's fight and Tybalt and Romeo's fight, they put scene 3.2, which is the scene where Juliet is waiting for Romeo and she says, "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds," although Juliet doesn't say that in this movie. But after a short version of that scene with Juliet, they continue with Romeo's revenge against Tybalt. The action picks back up with Romeo chasing Tybalt in cars. This is what that looks like. So once again, Tybalt does not return to the scene of his own volition. Romeo is proactively hunting him down for revenge, and he deliberately attempts and almost commits vehicular manslaughter here. So this is definitely not Tybalt returning. Romeo then, after this car crash, commits plain old-fashioned murder, and this is what that looks like. So, it's highly passionate, rage-induced for sure, but it's still murder. At this point, Romeo flees, and the prince comes, and Benvolio will give his testimony. This version actually shuffles Benvolio's lines and Lady Capulet's a little bit. This is what the speech will look like, just showing the parts that they include, not including what Lady Capulet will say. This will work if we cut the speech in half and move it around like this, moving this part on top. This is what the speech will look like. And this is what it will sound like.
Benvolio, who began this bloody fray?
Romeo, he cries aloud, "Hold, friends!" Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio. Tybalt, here slain, Romeo's hand did slay.
Prince! As thou art true! The blood of ours! Shed blood of Montague!
Romeo, spoken fair, cannot take truce with the unruly spleen of Tybalt. Death to peace!
The kinsman to the Montague! Affection makes him false! I beg for justice, which thou, Prince, must give! Romeo slew Tybalt! Romeo must not live!
So, we do enjoy the spin they put on this. Benvolio is highly flustered. It's like he's in such shock at what he's seen that he can't recite his lines of dialogue correctly. It's also interesting that when the prince asks his question, instead of immediately replying Tybalt, Benvolio goes straight to the line that starts, Romeo cries aloud. That's a subtle twist too. But what do we get from Benvolio in terms of controversial claims? None, really, except that Tybalt is deaf to peace. Hold friends part is included partially, but that's not all that important. So let's not worry about that. Benvolio doesn't even mention that Romeo bowed his knees, which we were excited to discover Romeo actually did. So, after having analyzed all of this, what will our verdict be? Well, here we can see that none of our four Benvolios claimed anything to perjure themselves. Either the actions of the fight scene followed Benvolio's summary in its written form, or, in the cases when they didn't, those details were omitted from Benvolio's speech. This is actually a very disappointing showing by these four contestants, in our opinion. What should happen in the story for Benvolio's testimony to reach its full potential is it should include some things that are true, others that are untrue, and other things that are in that foggy gray area in between. None of the contestants that we examined did that. The only contestant that does that, of the 5 contestants still remaining, is the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe version, because that performance includes Benvolio's speech the way Shakespeare wrote it. Imagine that, performing the play the way Shakespeare wrote it. What a bold and fresh decision by the Shakespeare's Globe. So at the end of today's analysis, we can see that we have one contestant, the 2009, who is clearly in a league above the others. We then have the other 4 who limped into this analysis in danger of elimination, and despite some mildly amusing minor details regarding the fight scenes, they all managed to perform quite poorly in their execution of Benvolio's speech. We are almost tempted to declare the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play as our tournament champion right here and now. We won't be doing that, however. We will still just be making one elimination today, but to reiterate, the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe version is undeniably at the head of the class. So who are we going to eliminate? We are going to eliminate the 1936 MGM movie, and we have a couple reasons to do that. The main reason is because of all the honest Benvolios that we studied today, the 1936 MGM movie is the only contestant that needed to alter Benvolio's speech in order to make Benvolio tell the truth. They changed, but by and by comes back to Romeo, talking about Tybalt, to just by and by comes Romeo. We've seen this contestant alter the text before. For example, in episode 2, we heard Benvolio say to Romeo, "Our Romeo hath not been in bed tonight." That's an alteration of the text, but it's one that makes the dialogue more interesting. What they effectively did in today's analysis was alter the text to make the play less interesting, which is a big mistake. Now, if this whole exercise seemed like one big convoluted excuse to watch some of these action-packed clips, that may be partially true. This whole operation here is one big excuse to enjoy these plays. But if you need one extra reason as to why the 1936 movie deserves to be eliminated, we can provide it. That reason is because of a massively critical error that we didn't even mention at the time, which is that the 1936 movie inexplicably and unforgivably does not include Lady Capulet's lines, "I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt, Romeo must not live," which are Lady Capulet's biggest lines in the scene, possibly the whole play. So, with that, the 1936 movie is now eliminated. So now we are down to our final 4 contestants. We have 2 stage versions and 2 movie versions. This is how it's going to work. We will have 2 semifinal matches. The first will be our 2 stage versions, the 1992 Stratford Festival play and the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play. These 2 contestants will battle each other in a head-to-head matchup in episode number 7. The Shakespeare's Globe play will be the heavy favorite in this matchup, needless to say, given that, first of all, we almost declared it our champion in today's episode, but also because the 1992 Stratford play is heading into that matchup already as an elimination nominee, which carries over to the next episode, so it will be on very thin ice. And then, in episode number 8, we will have the second semifinal match between the 2 movie versions, the 1968 and the 1996, who will both continue to be elimination nominees, making that match a sudden death match. The 2 winners of these 2 semifinal matches, 1 stage version and 1 movie version, will advance to face each other in the championship round in episode number 9, the Showdown finale. The last thing that we'll do today is we will officially end Act 3, Scene 1. Since we saw the very beginning of the scene, we might as well see the very end. And we'll do this by teasing the 2 contestants to be featured in the very next round, which are the 92 play and the 09 play. We've watched up until the point where the prince is just about to declare his sentence for Romeo. All that's left is for the judgment to vanish from his lips. So let's listen to a couple versions of this, starting with the 92. We can pick up precisely where we left off after Lord Montague's entreaty. This is the prince's judgment at the end of scene 3.1 from the 1992 Stratford play, with Tim MacDonald as the prince. Let's listen.
His fault concludes, but what the law should end, the life of Tybalt.
And for that offense, immediately we do exile him hence. I have an interest in your hate's proceeding. My blood for your rude brawls doth lie a-bleeding. But I'll immerse you with so strong a fine that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses. Nor tears nor prayers shall purchase our abuses. Therefore use none. Let Romeo hence in haste, else when he is found, that hour is his last. Bear hence this body, and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill.
And now the prince's judgment from the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe. Once again, this is Andrew Vincent as the prince.
His fault concludes, but what the law should end, the life of Tybalt.
And for that offence, immediately we do exile him hence. I have an interest in your heart's proceeding. My blood for your rude brawls doth lie a-bleeding. But I'll immerse you with so strong a fine that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses. No tears, no prayers shall purchase out abuses. Therefore use none. Let Romeo hence in haste, else when he's found, that hour is his last. Bear hence this body, and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill.
On the next episode of the Shakespeare Showdown show, we will have our first semifinal matchup as the 1992 Stratford Festival play challenges the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe play. How much fight will the Stratford play be able to muster? Or could there be a shocking upset in the works? The answers to these questions we will find out as we see theater performance versus theater performance. We'll call it Theater Appreciation Day next time on the Shakespeare Showdown show. Thanks for watching.